Chapter 37. Rosa Parks was tired. Rosa Parks, who worked as a tailor's assistant in a department store in Montgomery, Alabama, was a small, soft-voiced 43-year-old woman who wore rimless glasses and pulled her brown hair back in a bun. Parks had been secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, so she was well known to Montgomery's black leaders. She was also well respected. Rosa Parks was refined and reliable. But on the evening of the first day of December in 1955, Mrs. Parks was mostly just plain tired. She had put in a full day at her job. She didn't feel well and her neck and back hurt. She got on a bus and headed home. In 1955, buses in all southern states were segregated. Laws said that the seats in the front were for the whites and those in the back for blacks. Parks sat down in the section for blacks. Then, when all the seats filled up, the driver asked Parks to stand and give her seat to a white man. That was customary in Jim Crow, Alabama. Rosa Parks wouldn't budge. She knew she might get in trouble, she might even go to jail, but suddenly she found herself filled with determination. She stayed in her seat. The bus driver was filled with rage. He called the police. Rosa Parks was soon arrested and on her way to jail. She knew that blacks were beaten and abused in Montgomery's jail. It didn't seem to matter to her. She was tired of riding on segregated buses. She was tired of being pushed around. She was even ready to go to jail. When the ministers and black citizens of Montgomery heard of her arrest, they were stunned. Of all people, mild-mannered, dignified Mrs. Parks in jail? E.D. Nixon, who had been president of the local NAACP chapter, raised bond money to get her out of jail. But she would have to go on trial for breaking the law, the segregation law. Rosa Parks knew that some of Montgomery's black leaders, members of the NAACP, and a group of professional women were trying to find a way to do something about the segregation on the city buses. E.D. Nixon asked her if the NAACP could use her case to fight segregation. They both knew that it might put her life in danger. Blacks who stood up for their rights were sometimes lynched. Parks talked to her husband and her mother. Then she thought a while and said quietly, "I'll go along with you, Mr. Nixon." As soon as Jo Ann Robinson heard that Rosa Parks had been arrested, she began organizing a boycott of the buses. Robinson felt humiliated and angry each time she had to sit in the back of a bus. She longed to do something about the Jim Crow buses. Now she was ready to act. She decided to ask all Montgomery's blacks to stay off the buses for one whole day as a protest. Robinson and some friends stayed up most of the night. It was a Thursday. The Civil War was fought over an idea. It was property rights against human rights. Human rights won, but it was only a partial victory. There was another battle in the same war for human rights. In America, people accused of a crime do not have to stay in jail before their trial because, according to our laws, people are considered innocent until proven guilty. A judge sets an amount of money called bail that an accused person must pay to get out of jail. Bail is a way of guaranteeing that they will appear in court. The amount of bail usually varies with the severity of the crime and whether the accused seems likely to run away. Bail, also called bond money, is returned at the time of the trial. They printed leaflets, 35,000 of them, telling the black community to keep off the buses the next Monday, the day of Rosa Parks' trial. Montgomery's leading Negro ministers agreed to support the one-day boycott. In their sermons on Sunday, they urged everyone to stay off the buses on Monday. They knew that wouldn't be easy. Those who rode the buses were mostly the poorer citizens. They were people who needed to get to work. Some were elderly. It was December and cold. Some could find rides, but many would have to walk miles. And they all feared white violence. It was customary to intimidate blacks who tried to stand up for their rights. It was fear that made that segregation work. But something unexpected happened in Montgomery. Like Rosa Parks, most black people no longer seemed afraid. They had had enough. They stayed off the buses on Monday, and also on Tuesday, and then all week, and all month, and on and on. In rain and cold and sleet and through the heat of summer, they stayed off the buses. They shared rides, they worked out elaborate carpools, they walked. Houses were burned, churches were bombed, and shots were fired. But Montgomery's black people stayed off the buses. The jails filled with people whose only crime was riding in a carpool. Still, the boycott continued. When E.D. Nixon went to get Rosa Parks out of jail, two white friends went with him. They were Virginia and Clifford Durr. Durr, a lawyer, helped the boycott movement and because of that lost many white clients. The Durrs were not the only whites who sided with the marchers. White minister Robert Grates' house was bombed. Others lost their businesses or had to put up with insults and threats. Montgomery's black citizens had always thought of themselves as ordinary folk, but they were proof that ordinary people can do or extraordinary things. They were lucky. What they were doing was important, and they knew it. They were doubly lucky. They had remarkable leadership. The community had several strong leaders, but one was outstanding. That leader was a 26-year-old minister newly arrived in Montgomery with a pretty, musically gifted wife named Coretta and a 2-week-old daughter. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. When King was asked to lead the boycott, he accepted. He was a beginner as a minister and a leader, and he didn't know what he would have to do. But he and others found out that when it came to strength and vision and courage, Martin Luther King Jr. had what was needed. And so, a great leader, a just cause, and an inspiring idea came together at the same time and made history. That cause began with Rosa Parks. It was the cause of fairness. Segregation is unfair. Segregation is humiliating. Segregation is wrong. The idea was nonviolence. King had been considering that idea, and he wasn't the only one. A number of others, black and white, believed Gandhi's methods would work in America. It was King who took the idea, spoke it in powerful words, and inspired others to act on it. "We are not here advocating violence," he said in Montgomery. "The only weapon that we have is the weapon of protest, and the great glory of American democracy is the right to protest for right." And so, while the segregationists screamed bad words and kicked cards and set off bombs, Montgomery's black community protested with calm, unflinching courage. They didn't scream back. They maintained their dignity. Newspaper reporters began to come to Montgomery to see what was happening. Television crews came too. Soon, people around the nation and in other nations as well were watching the people of Montgomery marching. They marched to work. They marched to well-organized carpool centers. When they were arrested, they marched to jail. TV watchers also saw and heard the screamers and the rock throwers, and they listened to Martin Luther King Jr.'s eloquent words. There are those who would try to make of this a hate campaign. This is not a war between the white and the Negro, but a conflict between justice and injustice. If we are arrested every day, if we are exploited every day, if we are trampled over every day, don't ever let anyone pull you so low as to hate them. We must use the weapon of love. The weapon of love won the battle. 13 months after Rosa Parks' arrest, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on Alabama buses was unconstitutional. The boycott ended. Martin Luther King Jr., E.D. Nixon, Ralph Abernathy, a black minister and boycott leader, and George Smiley, a Texas-born white minister, rode the first integrated bus, and they all sat up front together. The people of Montgomery not only changed their world, they changed their times.